They asked for reinforcements. They got an entire human brigade. The alarm cut through my sleep like a blade. Red light filled the small cabin. I was on my feet before I even understood why. Years of training do that to a person. The mind catches up later. My name is Elena Voss. I am a corporal in the 3rd Combined Human Expeditionary Brigade. At that moment, I was 3 weeks into a routine transport run aboard the carrier Iron Harvest, heading toward a quiet trade outpost on the edge of known space. Nothing about the mission was supposed to be exciting. That changed in less than a minute. I grabbed my jacket and ran into the corridor. Soldiers spilled out of their cabins around me, half-dressed, eyes still heavy with sleep, but moving fast. We had all been trained the same way. Wake up, move, ask questions later. The command deck was already crowded when I arrived. Captain Daniel Cross stood at the center, staring at a wall of screens showing static and broken signals. His jaw was tight. "Report," he said, not looking away from the screens. A young communications officer named Laura Bennett answered him, her voice steady despite the tension in the room. "Distress signal, sir. Origin point is a system we have never made contact with before. Species unknown. The signal is weak and breaking apart, but the translation algorithm caught a few words. They are asking for help." "Define help," Cross said. Laura swallowed. "They said, and I quote, 'We request reinforcements. Any reinforcements. Please.'" The room went quiet for a moment. Requests like this were rare. Most species we had encountered so far kept their distance from humanity. We were new to the wider galaxy. New and according to whispers we had heard through diplomatic channels. A little frightening to some of the older, more established civilizations. They saw us as unpredictable, reckless, a species still finding its place among the stars. Cross straightened his shoulders. "Send word to Brigade Command. Full report, no delay." I remember standing near the back of the room, arms crossed, trying to guess what would happen next. In my experience, distress calls from unfamiliar species rarely turned into anything big. Usually, a diplomatic ship would be sent. Maybe an escort vessel. A show of goodwill, nothing more. I was wrong. Within the hour, new orders came through, and when Cross read them aloud, even his usual calm cracked into something close to disbelief. "Command is redirecting the full brigade," he said. "All 12 transport carriers, full ground forces, armor, air support, medical corps, everything. We are answering this call in full." Someone behind me let out a low whistle. Another soldier laughed, the kind of laugh that comes out when something feels too strange to be real. "They asked for reinforcements," Cross said, reading the final line of the order. "Command decided to give them everything we have. I did not fully understand it then, not the way I understand it now. To us, sending the entire brigade for a single distress call might have seemed excessive. But Brigade Command had learned something over the past several years of operating alongside other species. When someone finally worked up the courage to ask humanity for help, it usually meant the situation was far worse than they were willing to admit. We prepared for transit. The ship shuddered as the engines powered up for a jump far beyond our original course. I sat strapped into my seat, feeling the familiar pull of gravity twisting inside my chest as the stars outside blurred into streaks of light. Beside me sat Ryan Combs, a broad-shouldered soldier from the Northern Territories back home, who had been in my unit for almost 2 years. He glanced over at me, his usual half-smile in place despite the tension in the cabin. "You ever heard of the Kasari?" he asked. I shook my head. "Not until an hour ago." "Me neither. Command briefing says they are some kind of coalition, a group of allied species trying to hold territory against something called the Threshers." "Threshers," I repeated. The name alone sent a small chill down my spine, though I could not explain why. Insect-based species, apparently. Hive-minded. Aggressive expansion. The Kasari have been fighting them for years, and losing ground fast. I looked out the small viewport beside my seat, watching the stars stretch and blur as the ship prepared for the jump. And they only just now asked for outside help. Ryan shrugged. Pride, maybe, or fear of what asking humans for help might mean. From what I hear, most species out here still do not know what to make of us. I thought about that for a long moment. Humanity had only been part of the wider galactic community for a handful of years. We had proven ourselves capable in small conflicts, minor skirmishes, peacekeeping missions here and there. But an entire brigade, deployed on the strength of one desperate radio call from a species we had never even met, felt like something far bigger than anything we had done before. The ship lurched as it entered the jump. My body pressed back into the seat, my vision swimming for a moment before settling. When my eyes cleared, the viewport outside showed nothing but the endless black of deep space, dotted with unfamiliar stars. Hours passed. I spent most of them checking my gear, running diagnostics on my rifle, going over emergency protocols with the rest of my squad. It was something to do with my hands while my mind turned over the unknown waiting ahead of us. Nathan Price, our squad's youngest member, barely 20 years old, sat across from me, cleaning his boots with more focus than the task really required. "You nervous?" he asked without looking up. "A little," I admitted. "New territory, new enemy, new allies. That's a lot of unknowns at once." He nodded slowly. "I keep thinking about what kind of species asks for help and gets an entire human brigade in response. Feels like a strange kind of luck. Good or bad, I can't decide." I managed a small smile. "Guess we'll find out soon enough." The final hour before arrival passed in near silence throughout the ship. Soldiers checked their gear one last time. Medics organized supplies. Pilots ran final diagnostics on the dropships that would carry us down to the surface once we arrived. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Captain Cross gathered the senior squad leaders, myself included, in the briefing room shortly before our final approach. A large holographic display showed what little information we had gathered about the Kasari system, along with fragmented reports on the Threshers. "What we know is limited," Cross said, his tone serious. "The Kasari are a coalition of several allied species, none of them known for aggressive warfare. Their military doctrine is built around defense and negotiation, not offense. The Threshers, by contrast, are a hive-based species with rapid biological adaptation. They do not negotiate, they expand, and they consume territory as they go." "Numbers?" asked one of the other squad leaders, a stern-faced soldier named Owen Blake. "Unclear," Cross admitted. "Early estimates suggest the Threshers vastly outnumber the Kasari forces, though the full scale remains unknown. What is clear is that the Kasari are losing, and losing quickly." I studied the display, taking in the shape of the Kasari homeworld, its continents outlined in soft blue light. Somewhere down there, an entire civilization was fighting for its survival, and in a matter of hours, we would be standing beside them. "Our mission," Cross continued, "is to stabilize the situation, support the Kasari defense efforts, and prevent further loss of territory. Command has made it clear that we are not here for a symbolic gesture. We are here to make a difference." The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the weight of those words. As we returned to our stations, I found myself standing near a viewport, watching as the ship completed its final approach. Slowly, the darkness outside gave way to the soft blue and green curve of an unfamiliar planet, its surface marked in places by faint streaks of orange and gray, the telltale signs of ongoing conflict visible even from orbit. A single small vessel approached to meet us, sleek and elegant in design, clearly built by a species with very different priorities than our own. It looked more like a diplomatic shuttle than a warship, delicate compared to the 12 massive human carriers now dropping out of transit around it. I could only imagine the reaction of whoever was piloting that ship as they watched not one, but 12 enormous vessels emerge from the void, filling the space around their small escort like a wall of iron and steel. Ryan appeared beside me, staring out at the same sight. "I bet they were expecting one ship," he said quietly. "Maybe two." I nodded slowly, my eyes fixed on the widening gap between the tiny Kasari vessel and our overwhelming presence. I think we're about to give them quite a surprise." The comm system crackled to life throughout the ship, Captain Cross's voice carrying steady and clear. "All hands, prepare for planetary approach. This is what we came here to do. Stay sharp, stay disciplined, and remember why we answered this call." I took a slow breath, feeling the familiar mix of fear and readiness settle into my chest, the same feeling I had felt before every mission that truly mattered. Outside the viewport, the Kasari homeworld grew larger, its surface a canvas of unfamiliar cities and shifting battle lines, waiting for us to arrive. Whatever waited for us down there, one thing had already become clear. This was no small skirmish, no simple show of goodwill. This was a war, and we had just walked straight into the middle of it, 12 carriers strong, with no intention of backing away. The dropship bay doors opened with a heavy mechanical groan, and beyond them lay a battlefield unlike anything I had trained for. As the first wave of shuttles began their descent toward the surface, I gripped the strap above my seat and steadied my breathing. Somewhere down there, a war was already raging, and in a matter of minutes, we would become part of it. The dropship shook as it broke through the upper atmosphere, and through the small viewport beside me, the surface of the Kasari homeworld came into full view. Wide plains stretched beneath a pale amber sky, broken here and there by tall silver structures that looked more grown than built, their shapes curving and organic. In the distance, columns of dark smoke rose from several points along the horizon, marking the places where the war had already left its scars. Ryan sat across from me, checking the strap on his helmet for the third time. Nathan sat beside him, unusually quiet, his eyes fixed on the smoke rising in the distance. Laura, who had been reassigned to our ground unit as a communications specialist, kept one hand on her equipment, ready to relay information the moment we landed. The dropship pilot's voice came through the internal comm, calm and steady. "Touchdown in 90 seconds. Landing zone is secured by Kasari forces, but expect a tense welcome. They were not informed of our full numbers ahead of time." I allowed myself a small, tired smile at that. Somewhere out there, an entire alien command structure was about to have a very confusing morning. The dropship landed with a heavy thud, and the doors slid open to reveal a wide gray landing field surrounded by low defensive walls. Kasari soldiers stood in loose formation nearby, their tall, slender frames covered in silver armor that shimmered faintly under the amber sky. Their eyes were large and dark, set within narrow faces that shifted with clear surprise as more and more human dropships descended around them, filling the once quiet field with the roar of engines and the thud of boots hitting the ground. I stepped out of the dropship, my rifle held ready but lowered, scanning the area out of habit. Around me, soldiers from my brigade fanned out in practiced formation, setting up perimeter positions with the kind of speed that came only from years of coordinated training. A single Kasari official approached, flanked by 2 guards. He was taller than the soldiers around him, dressed in robes of deep blue that contrasted sharply with the silver armor of his escort. His voice, when he spoke, was translated through a small device attached to his collar, the words coming out slightly delayed and mechanical. "I am Fleet Administrator Vel Tarson," he said, his large eyes moving slowly across the rows of human soldiers now filling the landing field. "We requested aid. We did not expect an army." Captain Cross stepped forward, offering a respectful nod. "Administrator Tarson, my name is Captain Daniel Cross of the 3rd Combined Human Expeditionary Brigade. We received your distress call and responded with the full strength available to us." Tarson's eyes widened slightly, the closest thing to visible shock his species seemed capable of showing. "Full strength," he repeated slowly. "You sent your full strength for a single distress call. We take requests for help seriously," Cross said simply. For a long moment, Tarson said nothing, his gaze sweeping across the endless rows of soldiers, vehicles, and equipment now filling what had been an empty field only minutes before. Around him, his own soldiers exchanged glances, clearly struggling to process the scale of what had just arrived. Finally, Tarson spoke again, his voice quieter now. Then perhaps there is hope after all. We were led to a temporary command post near the edge of the landing field, a low structure built from the same pale, organic-looking material as the taller buildings in the distance. Inside, screens displayed shifting battle lines across a large map of the region, red markers spreading steadily inward toward the Kisari capital. Fleet Administrator Tarson gestured toward the map. "This is the current state of the war," he said. "The Threshers began their advance 6 months ago. What started as a small incursion at our northern border has grown into a full invasion. Entire cities have fallen within days. Our defenses were simply not built for an enemy that adapts as quickly as they do." I studied the map, watching the red markers creep closer to a large central point marked in gold, clearly the location of the capital city itself. "How much time do you have before the capital falls?" Cross asked. Tarson hesitated before answering. "Our estimates suggested perhaps 2 weeks. After this morning's reports, I believe that number may now be closer to 5 days." A heavy silence settled over the room. Around me, I could see the weight of that number settling into the expressions of my fellow soldiers. 5 days. Not much time to turn the tide of a war that had already been raging for months. "We will need updated intelligence on Thresher movements, numbers, and behavior patterns," Cross said, his tone shifting into full command mode. "My officers will coordinate with your command staff to integrate our forces into your existing defense structure." Tarson nodded slowly. "I will arrange it, though I must ask, Captain Cross, why would your people commit so much to a war that is not their own?" Cross paused before answering, his expression thoughtful. "Because you asked," he said simply, "and because we understand what it means to face an enemy that does not stop." Tarson studied him for a long moment before offering a slow, respectful bow of his head. "Then let us hope your strength matches your resolve." Over the next several hours, our brigade worked quickly to establish a proper forward base near the landing field. Engineers began constructing defensive perimeters, medical teams set up field hospitals. Armored vehicles rolled into position along key access points. The speed of it all seemed to leave a lasting impression on the Kisari soldiers stationed nearby, many of whom paused their own duties simply to watch as an entire operational base took shape in a matter of hours rather than days. I found myself paired with a Kisari soldier named Illyra Voss, though her full name, as she quickly told me with quiet amusement, was far longer and far harder for human tongues to pronounce. She was young for her species, though I could not immediately tell how young, her large dark eyes carrying a mix of curiosity and quiet exhaustion. "You move quickly," she said, watching my squad set up a defensive position along the base perimeter, "faster than I expected." "We've had practice," I said simply, tightening the last strap on a supply crate. "Practice fighting the Threshers?" I shook my head. "No. Practice moving fast and adapting to new situations. This is our first time facing your enemy." Illyra's eyes narrowed slightly, though not with hostility, more with careful consideration. "Then you understand nothing about them yet." "No," I admitted, "but we will learn quickly." She studied me for a long moment before offering a small nod. "I hope you are right, Corporal Voss, for all our sakes." Later that evening, as the amber sky above the base deepened into a soft shade of violet, Captain Cross called a briefing for all squad leaders. I joined Ryan, Nathan, Laura, and several others inside the command tent, where a large display showed updated reports gathered from Kisari scouts throughout the day. "The Threshers are advancing along 3 separate fronts," Cross explained, pointing toward the map. "Their tactics rely on overwhelming numbers combined with rapid biological adaptation. Any weapon or strategy that proves effective against them is quickly countered within days, sometimes hours, as the hive adjusts its biology in response." "That's going to make sustained tactics difficult," Owen Blake said, arms crossed as he studied the map. "Exactly," Cross agreed, "which means we cannot rely on any single approach for long. Flexibility will be critical." A young lieutenant named Sophie Grant, who had been assigned to oversee reconnaissance operations, raised her hand. "Sir, Kasari Command has requested a joint reconnaissance mission along the eastern front, near a region called the Hollow Vale. Scouts reported unusual thresher activity in the area, but their forces have been unable to get close enough for a clear assessment. Cross nodded slowly. Understood. Corporal Voss, your squad will lead that mission alongside a small Kasari escort team. Departure at dawn. I straightened slightly at the sound of my name. Understood, sir. The briefing continued for a while longer, covering supply logistics, communication protocols, and coordination plans between human and Kasari forces. By the time it ended, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones, though sleep felt distant, given everything still turning over in my mind. I stepped outside the command tent and found Ryan waiting nearby, leaning against a supply crate with his arms crossed. "Reconnaissance mission, huh?" he said. "Sounds like our first real look at these things." "Seems that way," I said. He studied me for a moment, his usual easy expression replaced by something more serious. "You ready for that?" I thought about the question honestly before answering. "I don't know yet, but I suppose we're about to find out." Above us, the violet sky had deepened into full darkness, dotted with unfamiliar stars. Somewhere beyond the base perimeter, the war continued without pause, and come morning, we would step directly into its path for the very first time. I spent that night checking my gear one final time, going over emergency procedures with Nathan and Laura, and trying, without much success, to get some rest before dawn. My mind kept circling back to the map inside the command tent, the steady spread of red markers creeping toward the golden point marking the capital. 5 days, Tarson had said. 5 days before everything the Kasari had built might fall. I did not know yet what waited for us in the Hollow Vale, but I understood, deep down, that whatever we found there would shape everything that followed. Somewhere out in that unfamiliar darkness, an enemy unlike anything we had faced before was waiting, and come morning, we would meet it face to face for the very first time. Dawn broke pale and gray over the Hollow Vale, the amber sky of the previous day replaced by a thin layer of cloud that muted the light into something dull and heavy. Our transport vehicle rolled along a cracked road, flanked by a Kasari escort team led by Alira, who rode in the lead vehicle with a small squad of her own soldiers. I sat near the rear hatch, rifle resting across my knees, watching the landscape shift from open plains into a region of low, twisted hills covered in strange gray vegetation. The air outside carried a faint, unpleasant smell, something sharp and chemical that seemed to grow stronger the deeper we traveled. "That smell," Nathan said from beside me, wrinkling his nose. "Is that them?" "Byproduct of thresher hive activity," came Ilira's voice over the shared comm channel. "The closer you are to an active nest, the stronger it becomes. We are still several kilometers away, yet already it grows strong. This is not a good sign." The vehicle slowed as we reached the edge of a wide, shallow valley, the twisted gray vegetation growing thicker along its slopes. Ilira called for a full stop, and our team disembarked quietly, spreading into a loose formation as we studied the terrain ahead. Through my scope, I could see the valley floor stretching out below, and my stomach tightened at what came into view. Structures rose from the ground in uneven clusters, pale and organic in shape, similar to termite mounds but far larger, some reaching several stories high. Around them, countless shapes moved in constant motion, dark and quick, their numbers far greater than anything I had expected. "That's not just activity," Ryan muttered beside me, his own scope trained on the same scene. "That's an entire hive." Laura crouched nearby, relaying updated coordinates back to base through her equipment. "Command wants a full assessment before we move any closer," she said. "They want to know if this is a forward nest or a fully established base." Ilira moved up beside me, her large eyes narrowed as she studied the valley below. "This was not here 2 weeks ago," she said quietly. "Scouts confirmed the area was clear during the last patrol." "They built all of this in 2 weeks?" I asked, unable to fully hide the disbelief in my voice. "The hive adapts and expands with frightening speed," Ilira said. This is what we have been fighting for months. Structures like this can appear within days once a breeding cluster establishes itself. I studied the scene below for a long moment, trying to estimate numbers, movement patterns, anything useful we could report back. The threshers moved with an unsettling kind of coordination, hundreds of individual shapes flowing together like a single organism rather than separate creatures. "We need a closer look," I said finally. "Command will want detailed imagery, not just a distant estimate." Illyra hesitated. "Moving closer increases the risk of detection significantly." "I understand," I said, "but if this hive is preparing to expand further, we need to know exactly what we're dealing with before it grows any larger." After a long moment, Illyra nodded slowly. "Very well, but we move carefully, and we do not engage unless absolutely necessary." Our combined team moved down the slope in careful, measured steps, using the twisted vegetation as cover. The chemical smell grew stronger with every meter, thick enough now that it left a faint sting at the back of my throat. Around me, the low hum of movement from the valley floor grew louder, a strange, layered sound made up of countless small noises blending together into something that felt almost alive in its own right. We reached a rocky outcrop roughly halfway down the slope, offering a clearer, closer view of the hive structures below. Laura began recording detailed imagery, her equipment capturing everything from structure size to movement patterns among the swarming shapes below. "I'm counting at least 6 major structures," she whispered, her voice tight with focus. "Movement suggests population numbers well into the thousands, possibly higher." I studied the scene through my scope, watching as groups of thresher creatures moved between the structures in organized patterns, carrying what appeared to be raw materials gathered from the surrounding terrain. "They're not just settling here," I said slowly, piecing together what I was seeing. "They're building, preparing this as a staging point for something larger." Illyra's expression tightened. "If this becomes a fully established base, it will serve as a direct launch point toward the capital. We are barely 30 kilometers from the outer city limits." A cold weight settled in my chest at that information. 30 kilometers, far too close for comfort, especially with the capital already under such heavy pressure from other fronts. "We need to get this information back to command immediately," I said. "This changes everything about our current defense strategy." As if in response to my words, a sudden shift rippled through the swarm below. The steady rhythm of movement among the thresher creatures broke apart, replaced by a sharp, coordinated turn as hundreds of dark shapes suddenly angled toward our position on the slope. "They've spotted us," Ryan said sharply, already moving into a defensive position. "Fall back," Illyra ordered immediately, her voice cutting through the rising tension. "Full retreat, now." We moved quickly back up the slope, boots slipping against loose gray stone, as the sound of movement from the valley grew rapidly louder behind us. I risked a glance back and felt my stomach drop at the sight of the swarm surging up the slope in pursuit, moving with a speed that seemed impossible given their size. "They're faster than the reports suggested," Nathan shouted, sprinting alongside me. "New information for the files," I shot back, pushing myself faster. We reached the top of the slope just as the first wave of thresher creatures broke through the twisted vegetation below, their dark shapes now clearly visible in the pale morning light. They were smaller than I expected, roughly the size of a large dog, but their sheer numbers more than made up for their individual size, the ground itself seeming to shift and ripple as they surged forward in a single, coordinated mass. "Positions!" Illyra shouted, her soldiers spreading quickly into a defensive line alongside my own squad. I dropped into cover behind a low ridge of stone, rifle raised as the first wave of thresher creatures closed the distance with terrifying speed. Beside me, Ryan opened fire, the sharp crack of his rifle joining a growing chorus of gunfire as both human and Kasari soldiers began engaging the approaching swarm. The creatures fell quickly under concentrated fire, yet for every one that dropped, several more seemed to take its place, the swarm pressing forward with a relentless, almost mechanical determination that left no room for hesitation. Ammunition is not going to be the problem, Ryan called out between shots. Numbers are. I focused my fire carefully, aiming for what appeared to be clusters of creatures rather than individual targets, trying to maximize the impact of each shot. Beside me, Laura worked quickly to relay our situation back to base, her voice tight but controlled despite the chaos surrounding us. "Command copies," she said finally. "Reinforcement dropship inbound. Estimated arrival 8 minutes." 8 minutes! It felt like an impossibly long stretch of time given the speed at which the swarm continued to close in around our position. Illyra fought alongside her soldiers with practiced precision, her weapon cutting through the approaching creatures with steady, controlled bursts. Yet even her disciplined efforts seemed to make only a small dent in the seemingly endless wave still pouring up the slope behind the first line. "We cannot hold this position for 8 minutes," she called out, her voice carrying clear concern despite its steady tone. "We don't have to hold it," I said quickly, an idea forming as I studied the surrounding terrain. "We fall back to the narrow ridge behind us, bottleneck their approach, force them through a single path instead of a wide front." Illyra hesitated only briefly before nodding. "Understood. Move on my signal." We fought a careful, controlled retreat toward the narrow ridge, using coordinated cover fire to slow the swarm's advance, while gradually pulling back toward the tighter terrain. The bottleneck worked exactly as I had hoped, forcing the thresher creatures into a narrower approach that allowed our combined firepower to hold the line more effectively than the wide open slope had allowed. Still, the sheer number of creatures continuing to press forward left little room for confidence. Sweat mixed with the sharp chemical smell still hanging thick in the air, and my arms had begun to ache from the sustained effort of holding my rifle steady through wave after wave of incoming targets. "Movement above," Ryan suddenly shouted, pointing skyward. I glanced up just in time to see the familiar shape of a human dropship cutting through the pale gray clouds above us, its engines roaring as it descended rapidly toward our position. "Reinforcements," Laura called out, relief clear in her voice. "Right on schedule." The dropship's side hatch opened even before it fully touched down, and a fresh squad of human soldiers poured out, weapons already raised as they moved swiftly to reinforce our thinning line. Their arrival broke the momentum of the swarm's advance, concentrated fire from the fresh squad cutting deep gaps into the approaching mass of creatures. Slowly, steadily, the tide of the fight began to shift. The thresher swarm, faced with mounting losses and the sudden increase in defensive firepower, began to pull back, retreating down the slope in a manner far less coordinated than their earlier advance. I lowered my rifle slightly, chest heaving as I watched the last of the creatures disappear back into the twisted vegetation below. Beside me, Illyra did the same, her expression a mixture of exhaustion and something else, something close to quiet astonishment. "You held that line," she said, glancing toward me. "Against a full swarm advance, with barely any warning." "We had good reinforcement timing," I said, still catching my breath. "No," she said, shaking her head slowly. "Your people did not panic. Not once, even when the numbers seemed overwhelming. That is not something I have seen from any other allied force we have fought alongside." I studied her for a moment, unsure exactly how to respond to that observation. Around us, soldiers from both sides worked quickly to regroup, checking for injuries and preparing for the return journey back to base. As we loaded back into our transport vehicles, my mind kept circling back to the scale of what we had just witnessed. If a single, still-developing hive cluster could produce a swarm large enough to challenge our combined defensive line, the full scale of the thresher threat facing the Kasari capital was almost too large to properly imagine. Whatever confidence I had carried into this mission had shifted into something far more serious by the time we returned to base. This was not a war that could be won through simple firepower alone. It would require every ounce of strategy, adaptability, and resolve that both our forces could bring to the fight, and even then, victory was far from guaranteed. 3 days passed following the Hollow Vale encounter, each one bringing fresh reports of Thresher activity along every front of the war. What had once been 3 separate advancing lines had grown into 5, the hive expanding with a speed that left Kasari Command scrambling to adjust their defensive strategies almost hourly. Our brigade worked without pause during those 3 days, establishing new defensive positions, training Kasari soldiers in coordinated human tactics, and providing armored support along the most vulnerable sections of the front. I barely slept, catching brief hours of rest whenever the opportunity allowed, my body running on a mixture of adrenaline and quiet determination. News of our encounter at the Hollow Vale had spread quickly through Kasari Command, and with it came a noticeable shift in how their soldiers regarded our presence. Where once there had been polite distance and quiet uncertainty, I now saw something closer to genuine respect in the way Kasari soldiers greeted us along the front lines. Illyra had become something close to a permanent fixture within my squad, her steady presence and growing familiarity with human tactics proving invaluable as our combined forces worked to hold the line. On the 3rd evening, as our unit prepared for another long night of defensive patrols, she approached me near the edge of our forward base, her expression more serious than usual. "Command has received disturbing news," she said quietly. "The hive cluster near Hollow Vale has grown significantly since our encounter. Scouts report the structure count has more than doubled." I felt a familiar tightness settle into my chest at that information. "That fast?" "The Threshers do not simply grow," Illyra said. "They adapt in response to resistance. Our engagement, though successful in the moment, appears to have triggered a more aggressive expansion response. So fighting them makes them stronger," I said slowly, the implications settling heavily over me. "Not stronger," Illyra corrected. "Larger and more determined. The hive mind interprets resistance as a signal to increase production and push harder toward its objective." Captain Cross called an emergency briefing shortly after, gathering senior officers from both human and Kasari Command into the main strategy tent. The mood inside was tense, heavy with the weight of shifting numbers displayed across the central holographic map. "Latest reports confirm what Lieutenant Voss's squad first observed at Hollow Vale," Cross began, gesturing toward the expanding red markers now covering nearly half the visible map. "The hive has shifted its full focus toward a direct advance on the capital. Estimated timeline for reaching the outer city limits has dropped to under 72 hours. A heavy silence settled over the room following that announcement. Fleet Administrator Tarson, who had joined the briefing alongside several senior Kasari officers, spoke quietly into the silence. 72 hours, he repeated. That is far sooner than any of our previous estimates suggested. The hive appears to have identified our combined forces as its primary obstacle, Cross said. Rather than continuing a broad, multi-front advance, intelligence suggests it is consolidating its efforts into a single, overwhelming push directly toward our position. Owen Blake studied the map carefully before speaking. They're coming for us specifically. It would seem that way, Cross confirmed, which means we need to prepare for a battle far larger than anything we have faced so far in this conflict. The briefing continued for nearly 2 hours, covering troop deployment, defensive positioning, and coordination protocols between human and Kasari forces. By the time it concluded, a clear plan had taken shape, though the scale of what awaited us left little room for confidence among anyone in that room. Later that night, Captain Cross called me aside privately, his expression carrying a weight I had not seen from him before. "Corporal Voss," he said, "given your performance during the Hollow Vale engagement, I am promoting you to sergeant, effective immediately. You will be leading a combined human and Kasari unit through the coming engagement." I straightened slightly, caught somewhat off guard by the announcement despite the circumstances surrounding it. "Understood, sir. I won't let you down." "I know you won't," Cross said simply. "That is exactly why I am making this decision now, rather than waiting for a quieter moment." The following day passed in a blur of preparation. My new combined unit, made up of both familiar human faces and several Kasari soldiers including Illyra, worked tirelessly to establish a strong defensive line along the primary approach route toward our base. Trenches were dug, defensive barriers constructed, and heavy weapon emplacements positioned with careful precision along the most likely paths of Thresher advance. Illyra worked closely alongside me throughout the preparations, her growing familiarity with human tactics blending smoothly with her own deep knowledge of the surrounding terrain and Thresher behavior patterns. "Your captain made a wise choice," she said at one point, observing as I coordinated defensive positions among the mixed unit. "You lead with calm confidence, even under pressure. That quality matters more than most realize during moments like these." "I'm just trying to make sure everyone comes out of this in one piece," I said honestly. "That," Illyra said, a faint smile crossing her features, "is precisely what makes a good leader." As night fell on the eve of the expected attack, our combined forces stood ready along the full length of the defensive line. Armored vehicles idled quietly in reserve positions. Medical teams stood prepared near the rear. Soldiers from both species checked their equipment one final time, the tension in the air thick enough to feel physically present. I moved along the trench line, checking in with each section of my unit, offering quiet words of encouragement where needed. Nathan, positioned near the center of the line, looked up as I approached, his usual youthful nervousness replaced by a steady, focused calm. "Ready, Sergeant?" he asked, using my new title with a small hint of pride in his voice. "As ready as I'm going to be," I admitted. "You?" He nodded firmly. "Whatever happens tonight, I'm glad I'm standing here with this unit." I felt a small swell of pride at his words, though I kept my expression steady, mindful of the responsibility now resting on my shoulders. Word came through shortly before midnight, relayed quickly along the communication network. Kasari scouts had confirmed visual contact with the approaching Thresher swarm, its numbers now clearly visible on long-range sensors as a dense, sprawling mass moving steadily toward our position. "All units, prepare for engagement." Cross's voice came through the shared comm channel, steady despite the gravity of the moment. "This is what we came here to do. Hold the line, trust your training, and trust each other." I gripped my rifle tightly, standing at the center of my unit as the first faint outlines of the approaching swarm became visible on the dark horizon ahead. Beside me, Illyra stood ready, her expression calm despite the overwhelming scale of what approached. "Whatever happens tonight," she said quietly, "it has been an honor fighting alongside your people, Sergeant Voss." "Let's make sure we're still standing to say that again tomorrow," I replied, managing a small, tired smile, despite the tension coiled tightly in my chest. The swarm grew closer with every passing minute, the ground itself beginning to tremble faintly under the sheer weight of its advancing numbers. Along the trench line, soldiers from both species stood shoulder to shoulder, weapons raised, breath held in quiet anticipation of what was about to unfold. Then, without warning, the first wave broke into full view, a vast, dark mass surging forward across the open plain with terrifying speed and coordination. The battle that Kasari Command had feared for months, the one that would decide the fate of their capital, had finally arrived. "Hold the line," I called out, my voice carrying clearly across the trench as the swarm closed the final distance toward our position. "Whatever happens, we hold this line." Gunfire erupted along the full length of our defensive position as the first wave of Thresher creatures crashed against our line, the night sky lighting up with the flash of weapons fire and the distant glow of explosions from artillery positions further back. The battle for the capital had begun, and there would be no turning back now, no retreat, no second chances. We were surrounded within the first hour, the sheer numbers of the swarm flowing around the edges of our defensive line faster than reinforcements could reach us. Supply routes had been cut. Communication with rear positions had grown spotty and unreliable. Yet still, our line held. Soldiers from both species fighting side by side with a determination that seemed to grow stronger with every passing wave. Laura's voice crackled through my headset amid the chaos, tight with urgency. "Sergeant, Command is requesting status. Reinforcements are delayed due to swarm density blocking primary routes. I glanced along the trench line, watching as my soldiers continued to hold their positions despite the mounting pressure surrounding us on all sides. Exhaustion had begun to settle into every face I could see, yet not one soldier showed any sign of breaking. I keyed my comm, my voice steady despite the chaos surrounding me. "Tell command we're holding. We didn't come here to retreat." The words left my mouth before I had fully thought them through, yet the moment they settled into the air around me, I felt their weight ripple through the soldiers nearby. Nathan, crouched a few meters away, glanced toward me with a small, determined nod. Elira tightened her grip on her weapon, her expression carrying the same steady resolve. The swarm pressed harder against our line as the night wore on, wave after wave crashing against our defenses, with a relentless energy that left little room for rest. My arms ached from the sustained weight of my rifle, my throat raw from shouting orders across the chaos of battle, yet still, we held. "Ammunition running low on the eastern section," came a voice through the comm, tight with strain. "Redirect reserves," I called back, studying the shifting battle lines spread across my tactical display. "Pull 2 units from the western flank. They're holding steady enough to spare the support." Around me, soldiers moved with practiced coordination, despite the exhaustion clearly etched into every movement. Kasari soldiers, initially hesitant to fully commit to the aggressive, adaptive tactics favored by human forces, now fought with the same fierce determination, their earlier rigid discipline blending seamlessly with the flexible, fast-paced style my unit had brought to the field. "They are learning from you," Elira said during a brief lull in the fighting, glancing toward a group of Kasari soldiers now moving in tight, coordinated bursts, reminiscent of human tactical patterns. "Even now, in the middle of this, they adapt." "Good," I said, allowing myself a brief, tired smile. "We're going to need every advantage we can get before this night is over." Hours passed in a blur of gunfire, shouted orders, and brief, precious moments of respite between waves. Word came through gradually that Brigade Command had finally managed to clear a path through the swarm's dense outer edges, heavier reinforcements now beginning their slow push toward our surrounded position. "Armor column inbound," Laura reported, relief clear in her strained voice. "Estimated arrival 40 minutes. 40 minutes felt like an eternity given the current state of our defenses, yet it was far better news than the uncertain silence we had been operating under for most of the night. As dawn began to break faintly along the horizon, casting the battlefield in pale, uncertain light, the true scale of the Thresher assault became fully visible for the first time. The plain stretching before our position was covered almost entirely in dark, shifting shapes, the swarm's numbers seeming to stretch endlessly into the distance. "That's a lot more than we expected," Ryan said quietly, staring out at the overwhelming scene. "Focus on what's in front of you," I said, though privately, the sight left a cold weight settling deep in my chest. One wave at a time. The armor column arrived precisely as promised, heavy tanks rolling into position along our flanks, their arrival marked by a series of powerful blasts that tore deep gaps into the approaching swarm. Overhead, the distant roar of engines signaled the arrival of air support, sleek fighters cutting through the pale morning sky as they began coordinated strikes against the densest sections of the swarm. The tide of the battle, which had hung in careful balance for hours, finally began shifting firmly in our favor. The Thresher swarm, faced with mounting losses from ground and air simultaneously, began showing the first clear signs of hesitation, its usually relentless advance slowing as confusion spread through its otherwise coordinated ranks. "Command reports hive activity shifting," Laura called out. "Possible retreat pattern forming along the northern edge." I studied the battlefield carefully, watching as sections of the swarm began pulling back in ragged, uneven movements, a stark contrast to the disciplined coordination that had defined their advance throughout the night. "Push forward," I called out along the line. "Do not let them regroup." Our combined forces surged forward with renewed energy, driving the retreating swarm back across the open plain, with steady, coordinated pressure. Illyra fought beside me through the final push, her earlier calm composure now replaced by fierce determination as we drove the last remnants of the assault away from our position. Slowly, as the pale morning light strengthened into full daylight, the battlefield fell quiet. The swarm, once an overwhelming, unstoppable force stretching endlessly across the plain, had retreated entirely, leaving behind only scattered remains and an eerie, exhausted silence in its wake. I lowered my rifle slowly, my body trembling faintly from the sheer exhaustion of the long night behind us. Around me, soldiers from both species began the slow process of regrouping, checking for injuries, and confirming the full retreat of the enemy force. Fleet Administrator Tarson arrived at our position within the hour, his expression carrying a mixture of relief and quiet astonishment as he surveyed the aftermath of the battle. Captain Cross stood beside me as Tarson approached, both of us still catching our breath after the long night's fighting. "I did not believe it possible," Tarson said quietly, studying the retreating traces of the swarm still visible along the distant horizon. "Not against numbers such as these. We had a strong line and stronger soldiers," Cross said simply, glancing toward me and the rest of our combined unit still standing firm along the defensive position. Tarson turned his attention toward me, his large dark eyes studying me carefully. "Sergeant Voss, it is my understanding that your words, spoken during the height of the assault, spread quickly among both our forces. We didn't come here to retreat." I felt a small flush of embarrassment at hearing my own words repeated back to me so formally. "I meant it," I said simply. "It shows," Tarson said, offering a slow, respectful bow of his head. "When we first sent our distress call, we hoped, at best, for a small gesture of goodwill. Instead, your people answered with everything they had, and in doing so, you have given us something far more valuable than mere reinforcements." "What's that?" I asked. "Hope," Tarson said simply, "and proof that even against overwhelming odds, resistance is not futile." In the days that followed, reports confirmed that the Thresher Hive, having suffered significant losses during the failed assault, had begun a broader retreat across all remaining fronts, its usually relentless advance replaced by a newfound caution that Kasari Command had never witnessed before. Our brigade remained stationed on the Kasari homeworld for several more weeks, helping to stabilize the remaining front lines and assist in rebuilding efforts across the damaged regions. Slowly, the initial uncertainty that had greeted our arrival gave way to genuine partnership, Kasari and human soldiers working side by side with growing familiarity and mutual respect. On the evening before our brigade's scheduled departure, Illyra found me standing near the edge of our now well-established base, watching as the amber sky above deepened into its familiar violet twilight. "You are leaving soon," she said, coming to stand beside me. "Mission's complete," I said. "Command believes your forces are strong enough now to hold the remaining front lines on your own. Because of what your people taught us," Illyra said, "adaptability, resolve, the willingness to hold a line, no matter how impossible the odds may seem." I smiled faintly at that, thinking back over everything that had unfolded since that first distress signal reached our ship weeks earlier. "I think we learned just as much from your people as you did from us." Illyra studied me for a long moment before speaking again. "When word of this battle spreads beyond our system, I suspect many species will begin to see humanity differently. No longer simply the new, unpredictable arrivals among the stars, but something far more significant." "And what's that?" I asked, curious despite myself. "The ones you call upon," she said, "when all hope seems lost, and there is truly nowhere else left to turn." I looked back out over the base, watching as soldiers from both species worked together beneath the darkening sky, their earlier distance long since replaced by genuine camaraderie forged through shared hardship and hard-won victory. They had asked for reinforcements, expecting little more than a symbolic gesture in response. Instead, they had received an entire human brigade, thousands of soldiers who refused to retreat even when faced with overwhelming odds, and in doing so, had helped turn the tide of a war that had once seemed impossible to win. As our dropships lifted off the following morning, carrying us back toward the waiting carriers in orbit, I allowed myself one final look back at the world below, its scarred landscape slowly beginning the long process of healing. Whatever challenges awaited us next among the stars, I understood now, more clearly than ever before, exactly what it meant to answer a call for help with everything we had to give. And somewhere out among the vast unknown of the galaxy, word was already spreading of what had happened here, a quiet promise carried forward among the stars, that when humanity answered a call for help, they answered it in full.